Might need to mute.
Hello, welcome to Talking Logistics, where we have conversations with thought leaders and newsmakers in the supply chain logistics industry. It's my great pleasure to welcome back to today's program, Pervinder Johar, who is Chief Executive Officer at Bloom Global. And today we're going to talk about going beyond the TMS status quo. Now, there is so much in supply chain and logistics that has changed over the past 10, 20 years. So it makes sense that the status quo in transportation management systems should also, change. But what does that mean? What does it mean to go beyond the status quo in TMS? Why is it important? And what defines and differentiates the status quo in TMS? Well, those are the main questions we're going to address in today's episode. And it's great to welcome Pervinder back to the program to share his insights and advice on this topic. So Pervinder, welcome to the program.
Thank you, Adrian. It's always good to talk to you.
Likewise, yeah. It's been, as we were commenting right before we went live here, it's been a few months since we've talked, but it seems like every time that just a few months go by, the world seems to turn around and turn upside down again, especially in the world of supply chain logistics, right?
Yeah, absolutely. There's just so much. We thought we were going to have a stable environment kind of every year now for 3 years in a row in few months. And I think it looks like that things are not really going to be, there's no new normal, right? We're still trying to figure out what's the definition of the new normal is.
That's right. I mean, I still remember, the end of 2020, people couldn't wait to get out of 2020, and 2021 was going to be, a big turnaround. And then of course, 2021 proved to be as challenging, if not more in some ways, from a supply chain standpoint than 2020 was. And then same thing, we couldn't wait to get into 2022, and here we are, and still dealing with a variety of different challenges, which I guess brings us to the topic, in terms of this evolution and this ongoing change and dynamic environment, suggests that we need to be thinking differently in terms of TMS. But before we talk about going beyond it, let's start with a kind of a basic question. What is the TMS status quo?
I think so I will probably say something which is going to be controversial, but I think TMS status quo is that no one cares about a TMS. Right? So it's almost that kind of, it has now, I mean, when I look at kind of any of the analyst reports, right, whether it's from Gartner or from other analysts, you look at Magic Quadrant, and I think you look at kind of what TMS people are talking about, and then whether or not they are relevant. And it almost says, for the lack of any other term, I say blah. Right? Same stuff for the last 20 years. We're doing some vehicle routing and optimization, some LTL to truckload consolidation. And what has happened is that so many other technologies have now come up, right, to make up for deficiencies of a TMS, because the TMS hasn't really changed, right? The world has gone by. But if you look at the current kind of TMS, kind of both on the system side and how we run our transportation operations, we're still sitting in kind of late 90s, early 2000s, right? Wherever the world has kind of passed us by. So that's kind of what the status quo looks like to me, Adrian. I don't know if that makes sense to you or not, but for me, it's like, yeah, it's nice, but it's not really going to make an impact on someone's operations or a company. So we need to go find a different solution for visibility. We need to go find a different solution for how do I do purchase order management. If it's an ocean on air, yeah, we don't expect our TMS to ever be able to do it. If it goes to go find capacity in the marketplace, yep, there are other solutions out there through brokerage and others. It's not my TMS who will do it. And I go back to, so why have a TMS? Why not just say that kind of everything else is outside the TMS anyway? And then why are we still living with kind of old transportation management philosophies and systems? I don't know if that makes sense to you, Adrian, or not, but that's kind of what I see as a status quo.
Yeah, no, it's very thought provoking for sure. I mean, I think I'm going to have to give that some thought, some more thought after this episode. I mean, I think you're right from the standpoint of, we've certainly have got to move away from thinking about TMS as this, standalone application, if you will, or just looking at it from a very siloed perspective, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think you're right. When you look at the world of TMS, as I think about it, there is this whole ecosystem that's around it, right? So it's visibility solutions, it's digital freight, it's compliance. So there's a lot happening in the world of transportation management, right? So I think as I'm talking off the top of my head here, so I think this will be a good follow-up post for me afterwards. But I think, we have to separate what is transportation management from a TMS, right?
Absolutely.
And I think that transportation management today involves a broader ecosystem of technologies than what we have historically thought about as just being all you need is a TMS and you're good to go. And that's no longer, the case today. So anyway, very thought-provoking and perhaps controversial. I'm sure it's controversial, topic. So let's take that as the starting point, and let's talk about, well, why is it important then? Why is it important to go beyond the TMS status quo, and what factors are driving it?
Absolutely. So I think if you look at it, right, so there's a notion, and you said it too, transportation management and then TMS have become two different things now, right? So that the TMS definition hasn't changed, but the transportation management has evolved. And the evolution has been that we are moving from applications to platforms which connect transportation by definition. Supply chain has always been about multiple companies. Transportation by definition is between more than one location, right? So by definition, it is that glue which runs our supply chains around the world. If you look at supply chain spend worldwide, it's $18 trillion, but transportation itself is $11 trillion. Which is the biggest part of the glue that holds everything together, right? And we have had this siloed version or a vision of what transportation means, right? We have been taught to say that transportation management system is get an order, looks like an LTL order, go run a consolidation or shipment planning engine, come up with a shipment, tender it, get some events once in a while, get an invoice, call it done, right? Maybe if I have some fleet, I might do fleet optimization, fleet routing around it, which becomes that how do I get to a dedicated fleet or private fleet optimization, that might be another flavor that is added to it. Whereas what people are looking for now, that how do I tie that transportation components to my supply chain activities? Because transportation is there to serve the supply chain is there to serve the customers. So if I think of it, at the end, all of our supply chains are designed around serving the customer well, right? So we manufacture because of customers. We do procurement because we need it for our customers. But in the end, they're driving the supply chain, and logistics in particular is now driving the supply chain activities, right? So that tie, which is once removed from customer, needs to probably change. And so if you think of visibility platforms, there is no need for a visibility platform to exist as long as you have a good transportation operating platform. I've been calling it a new operating platform, not necessarily a management system in there. And I think we have talked about it before, that there's a big difference when you view logistics as a platform for your business, or at least for your supply chain to begin with, but also customer facing components of it. So on evolution is that things which were missing, I think from the traditional TMS is that the number one, world is no longer all domestic consumption. Many of them were still designed around that how do I go do within a single country, LTL to truckload consolidation to begin with. Our world had changed, right? Our world is now that you have to deal with multimodal. You have to deal with things where things are manufactured around the world. It used to be that most companies will outsource their international freight and focus the TMS in particular just on their domestic businesses. Now you need one which has to deal with the business of today, not the business of 20 years back. The real-time visibility should just be part of a TMS. There should never be a need for someone to go outside your transportation. I'm using it interchangeably, TMS or transportation operating platform or logistics operating platform. the platform should provide the visibility, right? Because if you can't provide the visibility and you're running a transportation group, either as a business or a technology platform, what's the, what's the point, right? Because now you're not even managing where stuff is at any given point in time, because the job for a system is to bring those things which are running late, get them back on time. Okay? So I will say that's the second. First is international. Second is kind of the component around visibility. Third is rail is another mode of transportation which is being used heavily, kind of at least in North America. And rail has always been ignored, right? There are some rail TMSs out there too, right? And they usually get qualified as a niche player. Now, if you look at kind of how big the rail network is in the world, both in kind of America, in Europe, in China, in India, kind of like that's another part which was always ignored, that's not necessarily part of the part of my transportation management ecosystem. I will deal with it somewhere outside. You have seen kind of these big retailers go buy their own 53 feet containers now. And so I think if you look at it, kind of, we can talk about kind of what has changed on that side, but hopefully it gives you an idea of like, there's so many other things which we are trying to do outside of a transportation operating platform, and they all need to be kind of within the operating platform.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot there to unpack. I mean, on the one hand, when you talk about, okay, the LTL to truckload consolidation, I don't think what you're trying to say is that that's no longer important or needed, because that's certainly,
that's certainly needed.
Yeah, it's certainly needed, and that's certainly part of the end-to-end process. But I think what you're suggesting is that, and I'm certainly a firm believer in the this move toward what I've historically called supply chain operating networks, or operating system, or platforms, which people are, which you're talking about and others are talking about as well. And so the idea being here is that is that's a very limited scope to the world of transportation management, where now you also have the fact that you've got multiple modes that you have to deal with. So that international and that movement between modes. You're talking about, the visibility aspect, which, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's always been an interesting, I think many years ago, I wrote a post, which I guess might have been controversial at the time as well. Is like, is visibility a separate application or not, right? Isn't visibility, I mean, because if you looked at every supply chain application out there, everyone was touting that there was a visibility component to it, right? Transportation had a visibility component to it. Warehouse had a different visibility component to it. Then you have visibility platforms of their own. So certainly visibility is one of these, areas that, I think you can have a nice discussion or debate on whether it is a feature or it should be part of a transportation management platform, or whether it's something separate that gets, bolted on. And then you're right. I mean, rail, for many years, rail and parcel were arguably the two modes that were the most ignored by traditional transportation management software. And, parcel, of course, has come under the fold, in recent years because of, e-commerce and the fact that it's become such a big part of a growing part of many companies' transportation spend. But rail is probably the last of the key modes there that, hasn't been a focus historically, but it is a very critical component to many supply chains, even in e-commerce, right? A lot of people don't think about that in terms of, actually, I think it was just this week that the U.S. Postal Service said that they're going to, slow down, stop using air for the shipment of first class letters and packages, and start using rail and truck more, which is going to delay some shipments, or extend the lead times for some shipments. So again, rail is a key component there. So I think you bring up, overall I agree that the scope of what companies need, whether you're a shipper or a 3PL, need to manage this, what we call now end-to-end supply chain and end-to-end transportation management, really goes beyond what we've historically, thought about.
Absolutely.
So does this mean that the that the business case for a transportation management system or a transportation management platform is different today than it was 20 years ago? I mean, what's new or different today in terms of the business value that it delivers?
So I think, I mean, if you look at it, right, so if we look at this new evolving kind of what the new logistics operating platform, operating system is, right? The business value is much, much greater than what it used to be. Right? Kind of, for most part, 20 years back, having been doing TMSs for a long time, right? All discussions used to be, let's go do a consolidation study. And let's go figure out that whether your consolidation engine is better than everyone else's consolidation engine. Go show what the savings are. That used to be one business driver. Second business driver was that, can we do a core carrier program? How do we do transportation procurement, which was again part of it? If you do transportation procurement, can I get some savings? They used to be questionable because every time you did a procurement event, you showed lot of savings. The year goes by, next year you again show a lot of savings, and someone had asked you what happened during the year. Network changed, so many things changed that kind of some of those savings evaporated. But they were primarily the two models. Third used to be a little bit less, that can I save some on labor? Do I need less people? So on automation side, kind of those were the primary business drivers, kind of which we were looking at. Today, kind of if you include visibility in it, include rail, include kind of international freight in it, now you're looking at the business value first from the perspective of your customer happiness and how do I increase revenue, right? Increased revenue was never really tied to a transportation management system 20 years back. Increased revenue and customer delight is now part of kind of that equation, right? Tying it back to whether or not I'm able to do manufacturing and can I have the product kind of ship on time, right? In there was not a business driver that we ever looked at. And I think you're right. I'm not saying that you don't do LTL to truckload consolidation. I will come back to that, but that's almost like that's just a given, right? To be now, right? So we don't talk about iPhone 1 anymore, right? Because yes, kind of everyone has to be able to use a phone to talk to someone else. That's how I look at kind of LTL consolidation in my mind. It's a given. If I can't talk, I don't want any other features on the phone, right? So if I can't do those pieces, right? But the business drivers are now back to that. How is this operating platform helping solve kind of the problem CEOs are looking at of a company, versus the problem which was delegated down to kind of a director of logistics 20 years back. And it was more around cost management. And I think, kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, everything was kind of TMS meant kind of it's a cost management part. And yes, we want to do cost management, but it never really helped me increase the revenue or customer satisfaction kind of 20 years back. And now it's in those discussions that what would happen to my revenue, what would happen to my customer kind of experience. Does that make sense? I mean, that's the shift, is that it has gone from cost only to cost plus, but more, that plus part is so much more than the cost.
Yeah, no, I agree. Well, I mean, we've done some research here that, and kind of validating the research that others have done as well, that, companies are starting to compete more and more on delivering an enhanced customer experience.
Yeah.
And when you look at, logistics, when you look at transportation, it is so tightly linked to that customer experience. When delivery on time in full, whether it's on the B2B side with on time in full, or it's on the consumer side, competing, the Amazon effect, and meeting those expectations there on the consumer side. So absolutely agree. And I think that that's one of the main shifts that I've seen as well, is that cost management is not going to go away. I mean, it's always going to be a critical part of any logistics, supply chain, transportation executives objectives, is to control costs and reduce costs in areas. But you're right. I mean, I think that the things like customer experience, things like how can we leverage transportation logistics as a competitive differentiator to win market share, right, and increase revenue. And certainly the thing that companies have been talking about for the past couple of years is supply chain resilience, right? Mm-hmm. How do we look at this technology to help us to become more, to throw all the buzzwords out there, but they have, I think, more meaning today than ever before. How do we become more agile, more responsive, right? and to whatever disruptions may occur there. Right? So having visibility of the disruptions, understanding what the alternatives are, and being able to quickly pivot and change is becoming, as important, if not more, as you said, than just the cost dimension, which was, you know, it's very one-dimensional in the past. It was just cost. Now you've got these multiple dimensions that, really are. It's about balancing them all as best you can.
Absolutely.
So, so what's next? As a way to wrap up, what's next? What innovations will continue to drive and push TMS beyond the status quo?
I think we talked about some of them, right? Let's think holistically, right? There is no need for a real-time transportation visibility system because it's called transportation in the middle, and there it should be part of the transportation system that I have. But leaving that, I think my view, and it's been for us for 4 years, and the views have only got validated in 4 years. First, there still is another $1 trillion of transportation savings to be had out of $11 trillion. But the only way it will come is by doing optimization at the network level between multiple companies' transportation versus anyone. Right? So I think that if I go back to now, I'm going to almost reverse that LTL to truckload consolidation was good, but it was always done in the context of one company. And it always had some leftover LTL, right? But now if you think of it doing the network level optimization, right? And how do I go and do where I'm reducing the empty miles, how I'm looking at it more effectively. There's another $1 trillion a year of savings to be had on transportation. So there's plenty of optimization to be done, but it needs to be at the network level, at a platform, not at a one company level, right? So these siloed TMS won't really get us that optimization. Second has been, we do have to acknowledge that transportation in particular runs on the backs of millions of companies around the world who have 30 trucks or less. A platform that does not tap into it, right? So which is why when I talk about Bloom, we look at ourselves more like a DoorDash, that every small restaurant in the world can be on DoorDash without doing an order management. We're back to every smallest of the smallest companies around the world need to be part of this ecosystem, because you're not really going to get optimized or effective unless we can tap into the capacity which is tied up on these 20 some million companies around the world. Just in US, probably more than 100,000 companies, but the capacity is tapped at the lower level. And there's so much more to go do. So I think I look at that what's next. One is that do it at a network level and then not at a siloed level. So we're moving to 20 years from now, I don't know if anyone will have their own TMS. They will just tap into a transportation platform that they will work through it. And the last one has been this you talked about resiliency, but the second aspect of it, which is the environmental components, right? The US Postal Service side, air to rail, there's so much environmental savings, right? So if you think of the total CO2 emissions in the world, 27% are caused by transportation. 20 of it is by consumer transportation, which we are not talking about today, right? So it's about our own cars and our own what happens on that side. But 7% is still a big number. And we think by making the right decisions, more predictable, tying it back to the supply chain, you can again take out even 10% of those emissions. It's a big number, in terms of the lasting impact we can have on the environment. So what I see next is, I think those three trends. One, do the optimization at the ecosystem level. Let's make sure that we get everyone to participate on the transportation digital platform journey, not just the big companies, right? So the smallest of them. And the third, the environmental aspects are equally critical when you make your decisions, because there are two types of costs to optimize. One is what's in dollars and cents, and another one is that what are we doing to the environment. So I think those are all the things which are next for the transportation operating platforms.
Well, it's amazing because, just when you think that we've got it all figured out and there's nothing left to do, I think those three things that you talked about are, just opens the door to huge amounts of savings and opportunities. And I love them because, for many years we've talked about the need for collaboration, right? And walking the talk and collaboration. And there is so much waste and inefficiencies in transportation overall. And I think a lot of the technologies to date have helped chip away at and solve some of that waste and inefficiency. But even so, you're right. I mean, I think that there's so much more so much more value and waste and cost that can be taken out of the system if you're able to optimize at the network level, like you said, across shippers, across carriers, and so forth. And I think these platforms help to provide that visibility and the analytics and the data, to be able to do that. You're right about the long tail of carriers, the long tail of shippers and the like. Getting them involved, and that was historically been another source of waste and inefficiencies, because that long tail was the ones that were operating on faxes and phone calls and very non-automated, non-electronic forms of communication. And as we've seen recently here, sustainability continues to be an area that more and more requirements are coming into place, whether it's the latest news from the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission here in the US, or certainly in Europe. There's a lot of regulations in place or coming forthcoming as well that are continuing to move the needle on this. I think going back before we wrap up, going back, because I think you've given me some food for thought here, and going back to the the visibility versus TMS. I think part of it is, we didn't really talk about it specifically, but when we talk about platforms, and I've been a big proponent of this, to create a platform, and this has always been true about transportation, right? So, back when I started as an industry analyst 23 years ago, you bought the software, right? And it had all the optimization and all the workflows. But then the question is, well, gosh, in order for us to actually use this software, we have to connect to our carriers. We have to connect to our, so it was like, this whole other effort with EDI and of course, we talked about the long tail. We couldn't, it was too costly and time consuming to connect with all the really small carriers. So we would still fax them or just call them and so forth. So this connectivity piece was always, a big part of what was required to deliver the value of a TMS. But before software as a service came along, before platforms came along, shippers or 3PLs had to do that on their own.
Yeah.
So I think when you talk about visibility, as I think about it now, is the fact that, platforms inherently create this ecosystem where you're connecting to thousands and tens of thousands of carriers and other trading partners. So by default, if I hear you right, by default, by just that effort in terms of that you need to create this ecosystem of connected trading partners, you've created the backbone and the infrastructure to provide the visibility that customers want. Is that part of the, is that part of what you're saying? It's like, well, if you're going to be a transportation platform, you have to create this connectivity, and visibility is an outcome of this connectivity platform.
Absolutely. And I think that's why what I say, every one of our customers, no matter what visibility enabled application they use, they all get the visibility for free.
So, okay. So that's, I think we'll end it there. I think that'll be a good topic for our next conversation. I'm certainly looking forward to seeing, what kind of comments and feedback, we get, but certainly, as always, Pervinder, you provided some great food for thought, some great conversation and some great ideas in terms of where, this industry is going to continue to move forward. So again, thank you for making the time to be with us.
No, thank you for having this conversation, and hopefully I've not caused too much controversy.
I don't think it's controversy. I think they're valid points, and I think they're like anything else. I think it'd be worthwhile to debate them or get others to share their perspective on this topic. I mean, that's part of what we try to do in this program, is to spark conversations and I think that's how we all learn and get different ideas in terms of how to continue to move this industry forward. So, but I think, as you highlighted in your last comments there's still a lot of opportunity for innovation, a lot of opportunity for value and benefits for everyone in this ecosystem. So certainly an exciting future ahead for everyone. So again, thank you for making the time.
Thank you.
I want to thank those of you that joined us either today. If you want to If you have a question or a comment for Pervinder, and you're watching this episode on demand, either at the Bloom Global website or on Talking Logistics, you can post it there, and I'm sure that he'll be more than happy to respond via that medium. Again, thank you for joining us and look forward to seeing you in a future episode of Talking Logistics. Have a great day.